Historically, advanced developed countries have decarbonized about 1% to 2% a year. Sometimes there have been increases above that 2%. The fastest I can find in any large economy is a 4.4% rate of decline in Japan from 1980 to 1986. So meeting 2020 targets, if it's in the US with the Waxman-Markey bill or the UK, are impossible to achieve. We have to achieve rates greater than 5% a year. So what about current policy options? So the policy logic of targets and timetables that has people arguing about is there's a 17% reduction proposed in the US House, a 20% in the US Senate. These are fairly meaningless if we don't know how to achieve them. We ought to be asking what can we achieve and build policy around that, the first steps, rather than arguing about the last steps. What happens with cap and trade is that policymakers realize that they can't achieve these fantastic rates of decarbonization, and they build in programs like offset programs and safety valves and other strategies to guarantee that there's no effect on GDP. Because as you see from the Kaya identity, if you can't do it through technology, the only other place to have an impact is GDP. It turns out that no policymaker wants to affect GDP, so they'll be happy to affect the emissions part and deal with accounting tricks. So how do we deal with other wicked problems? And I'll just talk about advancing human lifespans. Imagine if it was 1920 and we were saying we want to improve average human lifespan by 2010. Someone might say, well, I wanted to shoot for 79 years. And somebody else might say, well, I want to shoot for 85 years. Isn't 85 years better than 79 years? We'd have this great debate in 1920. But the way that we advance human lifespans is we go disease by disease, public health challenge by public health challenge, and the end result is what we get from all of these incremental step-by-step approaches. Until we focus directly on improving energy efficiency and decarbonization of energy supply, all of this talk about targets and timetables is just going to be, I think, an enormous waste of time. And it turns out in the Senate now, the climate legislation is becoming what Greenpeace calls the Coal Energy Security Act, because it's guaranteeing a coal-fired future for the US. So what's the alternative as I wrap up here? So we should be focusing on decarbonization of the economy, not just emissions. We have to accept that economic growth is part of the fabric of our society, and it will be certainly through 2020 and probably longer. For efficiency gains, even though Japan isn't improving, they got to that low level through some pretty specific policies that I don't have time to talk about. I'm an advocate for a low carbon tax, as high as politically acceptable, not to change people's behavior. You're not going to be able to get it that high because the behavior you'll change is their voting behavior probably. But to raise money, to invest in technology, because technology is the key. And if we can create an ever-advancing frontier of efficiency gains, we may find that we can start lowering our carbon dioxide per unit GDP at a rate faster than historically. We may not get there. And so here I have something called an air capture backstop. In 20 or 30 years, we may decide we need to brute force this through biological or chemical air capture. And we need adaptation, certainly as part of our climate policy. I'm going to close with two pictures. This is the world as it looks from space. Just about now, and you can make out roughly the continents. Jesse Alsabel and one of his colleagues asked, what would the world look like if everyone lived like people in the West, in Western Europe and North America? And they came up with this picture. I show this to my students, I get two profoundly different reactions. One is, what a nightmare. Look at all of the potential CO2 that would be emitted. The other reaction I get is, how wonderful. Think about all the human potential that we would be able to capitalize on if people aren't worrying about where they're going to get their next meal or where we're going to sleep. From where I sit, looking at these trends, this is the world we're heading for. And so we ought to prepare for it by ensuring energy security, but also focusing on decarbonization. Here's how you can find me. I'm just up the road in Boulder. This is based on a number of papers which you can find from our website. And I have a blog where I raise trouble on all sorts of issues. And you're welcome to visit and comment. So thank you very much.
I hope you agree with me. We've had every speaker has had very fascinating, interesting, challenging things to tell us about, and I've learned something from each one.